Welcome, everyone, to the Week 12 Waiver Wire Show presented by the 33rd Team. I'm your host, as always, Josh Larky, joined as always by my co-host, Ryan Reynolds. Today, we're going to rifle through these top ads. We're going to talk about a few fantasy risers and fallers, in particular, based on some quarterback injuries. Then we're going to discuss some deep league stashes and just the general strategy of how we should stockpile running backs at this time. We'll hit on some quarterback streamers, tight end streamers, and we'll finish up with a multitude of viable defensive streamers. This could be a tough week for fantasy offenses. Let's dive right into Zach Charbonnet, Ryan. Kenneth Walker has according to Pete Carroll, legit, in quotes, oblique injury. Charbonnet is big, fast. He's good at pass catching. That's kind of what you need to score fantasy points. The two stumbling blocks that I see for Zach Charbonnet are that Geno Smith has a triceps injury, and it might be Drew Lock, and that his next four games, if Walker's out for a month, are the 49ers, the Cowboys, the 49ers, and the Eagles. I'd say those are three of the maybe five worst matchups that you could possibly have for your fantasy running back. What should we know about Zach Charbonnet?
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about the schedule too, like the workload that's coming. What I'll add is Geno Smith might stink again. So even if he's healthy, I don't think this is a great offense. It's struggled for over a month now. If Drew Lock is at the helm, complete disaster. But maybe we see an uptick in checkdowns with Charbonnet in the lineup.
That's what I was thinking. Fantasy RB2 type, just purely based on 20 touches per game. Devin Singletary, past two games, at least 22 carries, at least 112 rushing yards, and he scored a touchdown in both those games. The problem with him, because there's warts with almost everyone at this point, when does Dameon Pierce return from his ankle injury? I think Devin Singletary's done enough, though, at this point, with back-to-back 100-plus yard games to be the lead back. What would you say here? I'm thinking 60-40 split, where Singletary gets more of the work when Pierce returns.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And like you said, he's earned that. One thing I'll say here is the offensive line in Houston's gotten better and more healthy as the year's gone on. One negative I'll say is the last two matchups were good ones, but still, Singletary has been the most productive running back in Houston all year over the last 2 weeks.
Both those players, folks, if they're on your waiver wire, that is worth your waiver claim. That is worth emptying out the rest of your fab. This next player, I think, is kind of maybe a cutoff. I'm trying to decide exactly how much fab to spend. We might empty the tank as well on Khalil Herbert. Running back Deonta Foreman has an ankle sprain. He picked that up this past Sunday. But it didn't really matter because either way, Khalil Herbert led the backfield with 16 carries. He led the backfield with 11 routes. Deonta Foreman had the one red zone carry and he had the two goal line carries. So that's really going to be a big hurt to fantasy points if Foreman's active. But if Foreman's inactive, I have a hard time believing that the rookie Roschon Johnson gets those touches. And then all of a sudden we're looking at Khalil Herbert on a very functional Bears offense getting all the touches until Foreman returns. Should we just throw him in the max bid category as well?
Yeah, I agree with you. He's at least close since we're at this late hour of the season. Probably going to be the team's primary runner. One thing I'll add in is I was the most impressed with Roschon Johnson last week, as I have been all season. So I do think he could have an uptick in role as we get deeper into the year. But for now, with Foreman out, Herbert's in an excellent position.
Ty Chandler, Alexander Madison, you got to love the guy because he is the first non-quarterback to clear the league's concussion protocol and not miss a game. Congrats to Alexander Madison. He had 18 carries, admirable workload, 81 rushing yards. But Ty Chandler had only 10 carries for 73 yards, so far, far more efficient. Madison had 3 red zone and 2 goal line carries. Chandler just had 1 red zone carry. So almost all of the high-value rushing touches went to Madison. And then in the passing game, Madison dominated the routes. He had 20 to Chandler's 7. But it was Chandler who caught 4 passes for 37 yards. Madison caught 1 for -1 yards. I think Chandler siphons off more pass game work this next week. I think he siphons off more base down work. I still think he's going to be kind of he needs a big rush or a big reception to score. I think Madison's going to get most of the touches near the red zone, near the goal line. But I don't even think it's fully out of the question that Chandler can, even though he's much smaller, can work into those given Madison's fumbling issues. Chandler's the least safe out of the 4 players we've discussed so far, but I think he's got pretty massive upside if we have a running back that runs in the 4.3s with some pass catching chops, getting a nice workload in an offense with a mobile quarterback and really good skill players with Jefferson, with TJ Hawkinson, with Jordan Addison. So Chandler, whenever Madison's active, just a fantasy RB3 right now. But I think he can work his way into every week RB2 status.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell's a smart guy, and I think it was obvious that Ty Chandler's more of an asset in space in the passing game. I see that the same way. I think a best case scenario if Madison remains healthy is Ty Chandler's role starts to mimic Jerick McKinnon's from last year a little bit. I could see that coming. So I like him as a stash. Not going to go wild with a bid, especially since Dobbs is a mobile quarterback and checkdowns to running backs might be opponent specific. But I agree with you. His passing game usage should be on the rise at minimum.
I like that Jerick McKinnon parallel. Folks, that's Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. All his content is on the33rdteam.com. Make sure you are checking it out. Mondays, he has his survivor thoughts. Tuesdays, today, he drops his power rankings. Thursdays, he has his picks and predictions for every game. He writes up all the island games in depth for matchups. And then on Saturdays, the marquee piece, he lets you know what he's betting on in each and every game. AJ Dillon, another interesting one. We have zero clarity right now on Aaron Jones's knee injury. All I know is that it's probably not the ACL tear. It seems like it's a multi-week injury. Emmanuel Wilson, the third string running back, also got hurt in this game. AJ Dillon should probably get a massive workload this week on Thanksgiving. The problem is it's against Detroit. Maybe he'll get a pretty big workload in weeks ahead too. I think he's a fantasy RB2. The reason I put him this low is that I think if everything goes right, he's still the one that I'm the most squeamish to start out of all the names we've listed so far for fantasy, given this Packers offense, and that I don't think AJ Dillon's a great player. Am I being a little too harsh and that we should just worship the workload at this point?
I think, obviously volume workload is important and everything, but I have very little confidence in this offense. And my biggest concern is earlier in the year when Dillon got significant run, he did very little with it. And like you said, this matchup with Detroit's tough. I think we're looking at maybe he gets a rushing touchdown, 40, 50 yards on the ground, and you're hoping for some checkdowns to inflate his stat line a little bit.
We had to talk about Josh Downs again. This is exciting. I think the knee's probably healthy. They just had the bye week for the Colts. The next 4 weeks, he gets Buccaneers, 5th most fantasy points allowed to receivers. Titans, the 6th most fantasy points allowed. Bengals are middle of the pack. And then the Steelers, 8th most fantasy points allowed. Those are just some very tasty receiver matchups for someone that was already demonstrating that he had top 24 potential each and every week prior to the knee injury. I think especially this game against Tampa Bay and then the next week against the Titans. Colts are going to throw a whole lot. I think Downs is going to be one of the big recipients there. And I think you could be looking at 14, 15 fantasy points in back-to-back weeks with him.
One of the things I like about any component of the Colts is, one, they shouldn't be 5-5, and they are. And if you look at their schedule over the next 4 weeks, if they ended up being 8-6, it wouldn't really surprise me. And like you said, Downs has at least 3 good matchups. The Steelers in particular, when I think of how do you beat the Steelers defense, guys like Jarvis Landry, short drags, deeper crossers, those guys tend to have success. That's one of the things Josh Downs does well.
Isaiah Likely. I know a lot of waiver wire shows are talking about him at the top. We need to pump the brakes. Mark Andrews is out for the next month, maybe the rest of the season. It was announced he was out for the rest of the season. Then it was announced he might not be out. We don't really need. We'll play this a few weeks ahead. So Isaiah Likely, the next few weeks will be the Ravens, in quotes, starting tight end. He hasn't done anything. He had 23 yards a game as a rookie. Only Cade Otton had more rookie targets last year than Isaiah Likely. And then this year, he's averaged 8 yards a game. And he's had a snap share above 70% in 2 games this year. So he's even had 2 games to really show off what he can do. And we're still looking at a player that's under 100 total yards for the season. I have him just outside the fantasy tight end 1 range for this week. And I think that's kind of what we should think of him as, a matchup-dependent streamer where there is real upside here. Should he take on more of that Mark Andrews role, I just don't want to expect it.
Yeah, I agree. You have to wait, sit here and hold. The other thing, Josh, is we talk about this every week on one show or another. The Ravens aren't exactly a voluminous passing attack. So Mark Andrews is Lamar Jackson's guy, as we all know. Reliability, stability. Isaiah Likely's a good athlete, but like you said, he's a stash, and you're hoping he hits more than he has in the past.
Let's talk about Brandon Cooks. So 2 weeks ago, Brandon Cooks had double-digit targets. He caught 9 for 173 yards and a touchdown. Last week, he comes back down to earth, 4 targets, catches 3 for 42 yards. Here's why I like Brandon Cooks. It's not just that I think the Cowboys offense is ascending. I mention that every week now. We get it. But, and I know Ryan is staring at the tantalizing schedule as well. The next 6 games are more than plus. I'd say they're borderline plus matchups in a lot of them for wide receivers. These next 6 games, Brandon Cooks gets the Washington Commanders, Seattle Seahawks, Philadelphia Eagles, Buffalo Bills, Miami Dolphins, and the Detroit Lions. Ryan, that sounds pretty good to me. I'm not quite sure if we're starting Brandon Cooks outside of this Commanders week, but I know that I have him ranked in fantasy as if we should be starting him this week against a Commanders defense that just gave up 246 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns to Tommy DeVito.
Darius Slayton had a pretty big game against the Commanders last week. I know if you're going to grab Brandon Cooks, you have to do it now, because if Dak Prescott hung 400 passing yards and Cooks had 150 and a touchdown, it wouldn't surprise me at all with the state of that secondary. So, like Josh said, Dak Prescott's in the MVP conversation now. Brandon Cooks is the second option in that passing attack. Upside, not a plug-and-play player, but he definitely has big-time upside. In this week in particular, if you need a guy, I'd be aggressive on him.
We'll actually be talking later this afternoon, the two of us with our head of DFS, Jordan Vanek. We'll break down the Thanksgiving slate from a betting fantasy DFS perspective, along with that Black Friday game as well. So we'll talk a little more Brandon Cooks then. Have to assume Jordan Vanek's going to be very inclined to sprinkle him into some DFS lineups with Dak on Thursday. Odell Beckham Jr. Once again, just like with Isaiah Likely, there's no Mark Andrews. And just like with Brandon Cooks, we can start Odell this week in fantasy, week 12 against the Chargers. They just gave up Jordan Love's first 300-yard passing game of his career. That's more of an accomplishment for the Chargers defense than anything that it says about Jordan Love, I believe. OBJ should get the usage spike from Andrews being out. I think the hope is that every single week he's a fantasy wide receiver 3. That's the hope. I don't think it happens, but I think it should happen at least for him in week 12. He's a nice little rental at receiver where we at least have a path to him being an every down player that has some kind of talent in an offense that will score a lot.
Yeah. And the other thing, like you said, this week with the Chargers, people, they have too much talent on defense to be performing the way that they do. But the reality of the situation is teams just continue to shred them through the air. Jared Goff blew him up 2 weeks ago. Jordan Love had his best game in a month or more last week. And Beckham now with Mark Andrews out is, he's the second banana in the Ravens passing attack.
The second banana. The second banana in the Ravens run game, Keaton Mitchell. Keaton Mitchell every single week just gets a little bit more work. There's still stumbling blocks, though. We'll talk about it. Gus Edwards had 25 snaps this past week. Keaton Mitchell had 22. Congrats, Keaton Mitchell. We're moving up. Edwards had 12 carries. Mitchell had 8. The problems, Keaton Mitchell ran fewer routes in the passing game than Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. Gus Edwards got all the goal line carries, as he always does. Keaton Mitchell, you're going to need some very, very efficient between the tackles work. And hopefully he gets more pass work. I still think you can throw him into your lineup in deep leagues each week and just hope he scores or hope he has a big play. I don't think that's the worst strategy, but I think we're many paths away, though, from him being just an every week fantasy starter. He's more of a deep league starter or a strong bench stash right now.
Lamar Jackson's missed 5 games in each of the last 2 years. Gus Edwards is more reliable than Keaton Mitchell, so that's why Edwards is going to continue to outplay him, outsnap him. That said, any Ravens running back that plays next to Lamar Jackson is in a great position because of the space Jackson creates. And Mitchell is a burner, and he's broken a few big runs now. So if he's available, stash him. And like you said, Josh, if you're in dire straits, he is playable if you're desperate.
The last top ad we'll talk about before we hit some fantasy risers and fallers. Jaden Reed, Packers second-round rookie receiver, at least 11 PPR fantasy points in 4 of the past 5 games. That's kind of exciting. Less exciting, his target share has been under 16% in every game in that span. This past week, he had 6 targets. The target spike, again, just due to the Chargers defense. He caught 4 for 46 yards. He also carried 3 times for 46 yards and a touchdown. back-to-back games now with 19 fantasy points. I think he's a little bit more of a stash, but I think he's worth mentioning in this section because there's still a chance this Packers wide receiver 1 role is still up for grabs. It hasn't been Watson. It hasn't been Dobbs. I believe Dontavian Wicks, their late round rookie, has more receiving yards this year than Christian Watson. That's pretty incredible. That just shows, I think that's an indictment on Christian Watson and Jordan Love. Jaden Reed, hard to know exactly how to value him. I think we need an injury to Dobbs or Watson for him to truly go off. But I think there's this small path for him to just kind of become the target leader by the fantasy playoffs.
I mean, best case scenario is he's Jordan Love's Deontay Johnson, I'd say. I don't think that's likely, and I don't really want to bet on this offense in general, but I agree. The path to the top option in this passing attack is wide open. Christian Watson hasn't taken it. I've never been a big Romeo Dobbs guy, so that would be my interest in him. But on most of my teams, he wouldn't make the cut for me roster-wise.
Folks, Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. Make sure you're checking him out and reading all of his work on the33rdteam.com. It's all free to view. Let's hit some fantasy risers. Ryan, today, the Steelers fired offensive coordinator Matt Canada. The way I see it, this is just the tide that raises all the boats. I don't think things are going to be worse. I think it's either going to be the same or better for literally every Steelers player. I don't have too much nuance other than that since we haven't seen them play without Canada. But I'm trying to remember the exact stat I gave yesterday on our show. I believe Pickett's had 160 or fewer passing yards in 4 straight games. So it's been really bad.
Yeah, I wrote in Power Rankings, I think my exact phrase was Canada and Kenny Pickett are holding the Steelers back. We'll see what Kenny Pickett can do with the new play caller. And like you said, it's either going to be the same or better. The chances of things getting worse, I think, are very minimal.
Justin Fields, his return is good news for DJ Moore. DJ Moore's fantasy points in Fields' full games have been 4.5, 16.5, 13, 27, 49, 22.5. I did the math. That is 22 fantasy points per game this year. That is the same as Keenan Allen. DJ Moore has basically been Keenan Allen for fantasy football when Fields plays the whole game. But DJ Moore's games where Tyson Bagent is the main quarterback, his fantasy points were 10, 13, 9, 5, and 11. That is just under 10 fantasy points a game. So from 22 to 10, we're now back to the 22 range with Fields. I don't think Moore continues to score 22 fantasy points, but I think every single week he's a fantasy wide receiver 1 type with Fields at this point. Anything else to add with what you saw where Fields nearly orchestrated a big upset win on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, the Bears beat up the Lions for 57 minutes and just gave the game away late. Credit to Jared Goff for that mostly. The thing that I see about Moore here is with Bagent, ball control offense, game manager type role. With Fields, they're a little bit more aggressive. And, going forward, they have to find out if he's the guy or not. And if you're going to do that, you should be more aggressive, especially I believe they're 3-8 now. Wheels up for DJ Moore.
I'd agree there. And then lastly, the Chiefs' the Chiefs' Justin Watson. We don't say his name very much. Justin Watson recorded a team-high 11 targets last night on Monday Night Football. He caught 5 for 53 yards and a touchdown. That 4th and 20 to end the game. It was not an easy catch, but it was one Justin Watson should have made. Preceded by a play where Marcus Valdes-Scantling absolutely should have made the catch. Poor Patrick Mahomes. But anyway, Justin Watson, 11 targets, Kelsey 9. No other wide receiver then had more than Rashee Rice's 5 targets. I think this was a blip on the radar, but we should talk about almost said it again. Talk about Justin Watson because he plays on the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. He did have 11 targets in a primetime game. And I think there is a very small chance that he could be the guy that consistently leads this receiving room in targets where it's Kelsey and then Justin Watson. I think there's at least a chance, but I'd say most likely just let him stay on waiver wires.
Yeah, I'll say this, Josh. MVS may have cost me $1 million last night. I probably go to the top. I had a unique lineup. Tough one to swallow. I think I might have pulled it off. I know how that made me feel. I can imagine how it made Patrick Mahomes feel throwing that pass. So MVS has been, very limited production this season. Kadarius Toney's unreliable. Sky Moore does nothing well. Rashee Rice has the most potential in this wide receiver room. With Watson, he's just a guy that maybe Mahomes sort of trusts a little bit, but unless this volume stays this way, I don't really have a ton of interest. The only reason I have any interest at all is his environment and that no one else has stepped up in this wide receiver room.
Let's talk about some fallers quickly. Jake Browning is the new quarterback for the Bengals. Joe Mixon, probably a fantasy running back 2 based on volume. Jamar Chase, the way I was thinking about him, since I want to give a little more nuance than wide receiver 2, I think he's going to be lesser volume Garrett Wilson, where maybe there's a few more big plays mixed in. I think T. Higgins might be a flex play. I think at worst, T. Higgins could just be DJ Shark in terms of what you're getting in fantasy. And then we can drop Tyler Boyd. How do you feel about that? It seems like you chuckled at the Higgins one. How do you feel about the Chase one? Because Garrett Wilson's gotten there in fantasy with volume. I don't think the volume's actually going to be there for Chase just because he plays with Higgins and Boyd. But I think like he could take a slant to the house once or twice rest of season. How does all that sound to you?
No, it all made sense to me. The T. Higgins DJ Chark parallel made me chuckle because it makes sense to me. I've never been I didn't really like Jake Browning in college. I'm not a big Jake Browning guy. We'll see what happens. The only thing that I'll say with him is he does have a great supporting cast. Maybe he can pull off some 20-point, 24-point outcomes. But yeah, this is a travesty for football fans, fantasy players, everything in Cincinnati right now.
Geno Smith's status is in doubt for Thursday's game. He has a triceps injury. I think he misses. I think we could both confidently say Drew Lock lost that game on Sunday against San Francisco. That's going to be a painful watch. The only thing I wouldn't even say I'm super confident, but the thing I guess I'd be most confident in out of the receivers is that Jackson Smith and Jigba, with his average depth of target just hovering around 5 most weeks, he's probably going to get a few targets from Lock just to get him going in a way. I think we're just going to have to pray that we get a couple completed deep shots to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Overall, this is a net negative for every single Seahawks player. I think the two that might benefit, Zach Charbonnet with the checkdowns, Jackson Smith and Jigba, short area of the field. Are you seeing it similarly, or do you have optimism for Metcalf or Lockett?
I think Metcalf has an interesting ceiling in this game because they probably are, muddy game plan, conservative offense, run heavy if you can be. The 49ers run defense has been worse this year than it has been in the previous few years. But, a deep shot or two to DK Metcalf every quarter makes sense. Keep the defense honest. I don't have any confidence in Drew Lock, but he can throw a 40, 50-yard pass to a mutant downfield. There's at least some hope there.
Yeah, Lock, he's fearless with a decent arm. We'll give him that.
Right.
Slightly mobile. All right, folks, it gets worse because Tim Boyle is the new quarterback for the New York Jets. I did the research so you won't have to, folks. You're welcome. Tim Boyle's college career. He played 3 years at Connecticut from 2013 to 2015. During that 3-year period, he completed 48% of his passes at Connecticut. He threw 1 touchdown and 13 interceptions. 2016, he transfers to Eastern Kentucky. We were hoping for brighter skies. He doesn't play in 2016, but he plays in 2017, his 5th year in college. He's 23 years old. He's older than everyone out there, and then we start to see the flashes of his NFL potential. He has 6.5 yards per attempt in college that year. Usually we want our college quarterbacks throwing 8.5, 9 yards per attempt against much better competition than Eastern Kentucky. And he threw 11 touchdowns, 11 times more than he did his 3 years at Connecticut. But those 11 touchdowns, again, an identical 13 interceptions like at Connecticut. And he did that when he was older than his Eastern Kentucky competition. He has no mobility. He had more sack yards lost than yards rushed for every single year in college. In his NFL career to this point, he's averaged 5 yards per attempt. That's atrocious. That's way worse than Zach Wilson. He has thrown 3 touchdowns, but they've come with 9 interceptions. He started 3 games in his career, and he's now 29 years old. Ryan, let's just keep piling on. I think this is the one quarterback that could be a downgrade from Zach Wilson.
Why is Tim Boyle starting an NFL game is my question. I don't understand this at all. To be perfectly honest with you, Josh, I think the Jets bringing back Tim Tebow would make more sense because at least it would create waves in the media. Tim Boyle might be the one quarterback in the league that may have less success this week than Zach Wilson will against Vic Fangio's defense. The other thing is, why isn't Trevor Siemian playing over this guy? I mean, Trevor Siemian isn't good, but at least we've seen he's won an NFL game or two. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, the fact that Simeon's backup, Zach Wilson's third string, they played with Joe Flacco was on this team last year. Year. How did they at no point call him up and be like, hey, Joe, would you like to be our quarterback this season?
Yeah.
I don't understand it. They let Mike White go to the Dolphins. That was another guy that they should have kept. The fact that you go into this season with Aaron Rodgers followed by Zach Wilson truly blows me away. All right, let's move on to something productive because I think Ryan and I could just steam angry and talk about Tim Boyle and this Jets offense for another 30 minutes. Stashes. I'll run through these quickly. Salvon Ahmed, Miami Dolphins running back. Devon Achane picked up a knee injury again. It's unknown severity. Ahmed, not Jeff Wilson, was the running back that came in and handled 3 carries, 3 targets, totaled 38 yards. I don't know what's going on with Jeff Wilson, but it's now been, I think, a full month of him being back, and he just hasn't done anything. So Ahmed is the guy there. In our deep leagues, when we want to stash players, these backup running backs are the ones to stash because an injury happens and suddenly they get significant playing time increases. Could say the same for Dearness Johnson of the Jaguars. Travis Etienne had 14 carries and 3 targets. Dearness Johnson had 7 carries and a target. Dearness Johnson was out-touched by Tank Bigsby, who had 9 carries. That's what you should tell your league mates, because Tank Bigsby's 9 carries came on the final drive of the game. Dearness Johnson was the actual backup running back to Travis Etienne, the clear handcuff. Bigsby came in, I believe it was 34-7. Jaguars were trouncing the Titans. Then they let Mr. Tank come in for some mop-up duty. And then finally, Jerick McKinnon. If anything happens to Isaiah Pacheco, we've seen him be a fantasy RB1 in a lead role before. And I'm sure Ryan agrees with me. Clyde Edwards-Helaire looked thick last night. My goodness. The dude looked like a fullback. I don't know what's going on. I believe he's 5'9", 205 is what he's listed at. I think he was 5'9", 230 last night. I don't know what's happened. Ryan, do you have anything to weigh in on here? Am I crazy? I think CEH became CE thick last night?
Yeah, I don't want to disparage the guy like that, but I'll say this. Isaiah Pacheco is wildly, wildly better than CEH at this point in his career. Wildly better.
Let's talk about quarterback streamers. Matthew Stafford travels on the road to Arizona to face the Cardinals. Cardinals allow the 8th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, 18.5 per game. They allow the 6th highest yards per pass attempt. Quarterbacks have been efficient. Stafford is your top streamer of the week if Cooper Kupp is back from injury. Anything to add here?
Yeah, for me, it's dependent on Cooper Kupp, and I'll also say this. The downside's bigger with Stafford's hand. It's a bit like when Derek Carr injured his throwing shoulder. He had two pretty poor weeks coming off that. I do think there's more downside here than if Stafford was 100% go, then slam dunk top streamer of the week.
The safest streamer of the week? Gardner Minshew hosts the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Buccaneers allow the 2nd highest yards per pass attempt at 8 and the 3rd most fantasy points per game, 20 to quarterbacks. Stafford is better than Minshew. Minshew's in a better spot in many ways. Stafford's going to have the higher ceiling. He's the guy that can really light up a defense. He has the better supporting cast, but Gardner Minshew, better matchup, safer floor. Anything to add to Minshew?
I love Gardner Minshew. Again, I can't believe the Colts are still 5-5 and in like literal contention to be a wild card in the AFC. He's going to have to let it rip against Tampa Bay, and that's very appealing because you cannot really run on them.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers yet to allow a rushing touchdown to a running back this season.
Wow.
Baker Mayfield. Sure enough, he's on the other end of that game at the Colts. Colts allow the 10th highest yards per attempt to quarterbacks. We talked about it last week. We said, guys, Baker Mayfield's had fantasy points of at least 17 in 4 straight games, but that's going to end against the Niners. Please don't start him. You're welcome. He had 13 fantasy points last week, but guess what? He's back in the saddle this week against the Colts. I think you can fire him up for some kind of floor. I think he gets you probably 16, 17 fantasy points without all that much more against the Colts. Anything to add here to Mr. Mayfield?
I mean, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans against that Colts secondary is pretty appealing. I don't think Baker Mayfield's safe, but this offense essentially runs on him. It's very reliant on him. This game has some shootout potential, Josh.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. I would agree there. Smells like a maybe. Smells like an over. Talk about tight end streamers. Hunter Henry at the New York Giants. The past 3 games with Kendrick Bourne out due to the ACL tear, he's averaging nearly 5 targets a game, just over 3 catches, 29 receiving yards a game. Overall, with the touchdown that he scored in one of those 3 games, it translates to just over 8 fantasy points per game. That is doable for a streamer. And then we have Tyler Conklin versus Miami. Teams have to throw versus Miami to keep pace. Maybe this is Tim Boyle's best friend in the short area of the field. Conklin's been a little bit inconsistent this year, but some of his big games have been pretty big in terms of target volume, and I think we could be looking at one of those here. Anything to add to either of these options?
Yeah, with Henry, the Patriots are going to have to do something on offense, and he's kind of the default option among their pass catchers. So I think he's solid, limited ceiling, but solid. And like you said with Conklin, a bad quarterback's best friend can be a tight end, and Tyler Conklin's a good player. It's just one thing I'm concerned with there is, will they keep their tight ends in the block a little bit more against the Dolphins' pretty solid front four?
Yeah, that's the concern there too. Let's rifle through some defensive streamers, Ryan. This is my favorite part of the show. This is your time to shine. Folks, before we get to that, though, reminder, Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. You can find me, Josh Larky, at JLarkyTweets. Our work's on the33team.com. My fantasy rankings will be on the site later today. Ryan's power rankings are already up on the site, and we'll be back this afternoon with our head of DFS, Jordan Vanek, to preview the Thanksgiving slate and the Black Friday game. Defensive streamers, Ryan, the Saints travel to Atlanta. There's probably a few leagues where the Saints were dropped because of their bye. This feels like the smash pickup if they're available.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting Desmond Ritter's back in the saddle for Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith's offense has been erratic. This is a must-win game for both teams. I do think it's kind of a coin flip because they're familiar rivals, but Saints defense has been a top 10 group all year. Pretty solid option now and going forward.
Minnesota Vikings, they host the Bears. This defense has been good this year. What else should we know about the Vikings?
Yeah, with this one, Brian Flores, if you're giving a coordinator an award, I think he probably wins it. What he's done with this defense has been fantastic. Kind of don't want to play him too much against the Bears. I think the Bears could conceivably win this game, but solid, decent option this week with some potential going forward.
The Detroit Lions host the Green Bay Packers on Thanksgiving.
I'm interested in betting against Jordan Love whenever he's going to have to play in a negative game script. That's the primary reason why I like Detroit in this matchup.
Yeah, hopefully it's a repeat in some ways of what happened last time these two teams played on. Actually, Ryan, was it Thursday night as well when they played earlier this year? It just hit me. Are they playing 2 matchups against each other, both on Thursday? Because I believe early in the season, that was a Thursday night game. I don't know if we might be making history. We might have to look into this more. Folks, stay tuned. I'll come with this note prepared for the Thanksgiving show that we do with Jordan. The Titans host the Carolina Panthers.
I'm surprised Tennessee's a 4-point favorite, but again, the Panthers offense has been non-functional all year. This is a sneaky, the Panthers don't get their first overall pick, but whoever loses this game has if the Titans lose this game, they have a shot at getting the first overall pick. I like the Titans pass rush against the Panthers offensive line in particular.
And which side do we prefer here? Tampa Bay and the Colts. 2 quarterbacks with turnover issues. How do you see this one?
I do think there's some shootout potential here. I think I'll lean Colts coming off their bye because I think Shane Steichen's has a better coaching staff than Todd Bowles right now.
And let's close out the show, folks. This is the one everyone wants to know about. The game total's frighteningly low. It's in the low 30s. Which side or both do you prefer of the Patriots traveling to New York to face the Giants?
Ooh, this is a barn burner in the Meadowlands this week. Hide your eyes if you like offense. Bill Belichick against Tommy DeVito is a fascinating. Bill Belichick coming off a bye against Tommy DeVito is a fascinating dynamic. The Patriots are 3.5-point road favorites. I'd imagine public volumes weigh on the Giants right now. I wouldn't want any part of that. This will be a Patriots or pass for me.